I'd like to invite, straight from the studios of Top Gun, another expert on how to keep things flowing, a brother in arms. Get ready for this ritual descent with Brian Rivera. He'll be lighting up the discussion panel from the series No Way Out. Brian.
All right. You all have your electronic nicotine out, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward to one slide. There should be a QRC code coming up here, a QR code. There it is. What I'd like you to do is go ahead and scan that. That goes to the Apple podcast, No Way Out. If you don't use Apple, go ahead and look it up on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll find a recent podcast with Sonja Blignaut that we just did on Saturday, actually. So awesome podcast. But here's the deal. At our coffee break, coming up shortly, if you come up to me and you show me that you're following the podcast, subscribing to it, and maybe if you give it a rating that looks something like that. Yeah, that's right. Fist of five. Come up to me at during the coffee break, and I'll get you registered to win this iPad 9. It's nicer than a book. And you can put the book on it. All right, so hey, I'm going to tell you something real fast. There are certain features of the world that we just cannot escape, right? There's uncertainty, ambiguity, volatility. There's quantum uncertainty, numerical imprecision, surprise. There's taco now. There's banny. There's tuna. There's all these things that are describing the external environment. But today we're going to call that complexity, okay? And that's what Sonja was talking about this morning. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Sonja and Nigel come up here, and we're going to have a discussion about what we just heard, and who knows where this is going to go. So let me give you my insights as they come on up here. So Sonja talked about complexity, that we have to not have an adversarial relationship with complexity, right? I agree with her. Nigel talked about bullshit jobs. Thank you for letting me say that, Nigel. That's awesome. I always want to get on stage and say that. But he talked about that. So why do we have bullshit jobs? It's because we have an adversarial relationship with complexity, and it's easier to sell bullshit jobs to folks, right? And that's the connection that I'm hearing this morning. So I want to invite Sonja and Nigel up here, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. Now, where are we going to go with this? That's a great question. There's many places we can go today. So 1 year ago, when Nigel and I were here on stage, who here uses ChatGPT, LLMs? Did they exist last year at this time? Nah, they're just coming out, right? So a lot has changed in the last year. So the direction that we're heading right now with AI, machine learning, all these amazing things are accelerating the complexity in the world, which means if we don't change, we're going to have more bullshit jobs, right?
Absolutely. Lots of bullshit.
Yeah. All right. So thanks for being here and talking about us today. This is great. I get an opportunity to be on stage with my friends, people that mentor me, people that make fun of me, people that say I should wear white socks. And I did. All right. So a little bit of play there. So, Nigel,
Punch.
Can you give me a little insights on is Sonja right in what she's talking about with the relationship with the complexity?
Oh, absolutely. Everything she talks about. We really need to, somebody say a nasty word now, we need to demystify complexity, you see. You can't.
Nasty about that.
Yeah, so we need to start thinking about our environments, our relationships, the context in which we find ourselves. We need to start realizing that if you look in the mirror, what's looking back at you is a complex adaptive system. So we need to start having new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching the challenges and the problems we're trying to solve. And so the work that Sonja's been doing over the last few years, and people like Dave Snowden, has contributed significantly to the work we've been able to do, and our understanding of this enabled us to do a few things. I just want to say, though, Punch is a third of those books and a third of the work we've done. So
I'm just a bigger third.
Yeah.
Nobody got the joke.
With white socks.
With white socks.
With really good Top Gun socks.
I appreciate it.
You can't see them at the back. They've got planes on them.
So there's a destination. I don't want to say a destination, but a journey that we need to go on. And to me, we need a unifying approach or understanding of a couple things. And I think that's what complexity allows us to think about is how do humans and living systems persist in time? How do we stay out of equilibrium, right? And that's a lot of the things we talk about on the podcast. And there's some new insights about that. How do we perceive reality? How do we learn? How do we act? How do we plan? How do we make decisions? What drives our emotions? And are they the same? So I believe what's happening now is there's this convergence of ideas that are leading to that, right? And it's not to say that the things that we created are the destination or anything like that, but they're part of that journey to help organizations understand how to survive in this age of artificial intelligence and technology and all that. So, Sonja, any thoughts on that? Is there a journey that we can go on, or where would you take this to in the future? What are you seeing needs to happen for organizations, individuals, and everybody to survive this this artificial intelligence thing that we're seeing?
I think there are a couple of things. I think one is to really embrace our humanity. There are some things machines can't do. But, that goes back to things like play and imagination and humor and empathy and, those things that we've kind of been taught does not necessarily belong in the world of business. Yeah. So that's the one thing. And then I think it's becoming more change-able. I think we've, the same as with complexity, we've almost made change this force that's almost like an oppositional force that we resist. I mean, those of you who work in change management, we resist change. We manage change. And there I really enjoy the work of Robert Chia. He's an academic out of the UK who talks about managing change by letting it happen. And he says we don't necessarily need new structures. We need to remove structures. We need to get out of the way of the change that it wants to happen. Mm-hmm. And so I really think it is getting out of this way of perceiving the world as stabilities and objects and, wanting to go back to stability all the time and just understanding that change is already always happening and we need to kind of get into the flow of that change. And here Bejan's work that I know, Adrian Bejan, that talks about if you give a flow system, which I believe almost all organizations, all human systems are flow systems, given freedom, they will evolve their structures to enable better flow. And so I think there's something there in terms of letting go, getting out of the way of change, and becoming more flexible and adaptive.
Is this anarchy you're talking about?
No.
Okay.
I just want to add something, Ponch, because as I'm listening and you're talking, and of course the topic's AI, or AI is in there. Mm-hmm. So I did another talk a few months ago in Brazil, and I started talking about leadership behaviors, a little bit of the talk I did earlier here today. And we start to then say, okay, so we're teaching the machines, the learning algorithms, the machine learning, based upon our behaviors, our attitudes. That's the initial seed that we teach them. And let's say AI ever gains any level of self-awareness or sentience. Let's hope it never, ever happens. Skynet is coming and that type of thing. But as it starts to evolve, it starts to learn how we all behave. So it starts to emulate our behaviors. And so if you've got bad leaders and bad management, now we've got bad AI managing and leading us. And then AI gets control. See the military guys in the audience. It's always great to see representation for the military at this conference, so welcome. But we start to then see that these systems start to make decisions for us. Because we get lazy, we stop making decisions. And Ponch is a military guy. So suddenly the machines are now making decisions about our defense. Mm-hmm. And then it decides, there's a guy somewhere, next door to Ukraine that's being a bit silly at the moment. And it decides to, we'll just take him out. So AI makes this decision, and we end life as we know it.
Yeah. When we fight wars, we don't win them. And I'm not advocating wars, but when we think about it, you don't fight a war with machines. You fight it with your mind, right? It's always in the head. So in my background in aviation, once we started automating things in the cockpit, bad things started to happen, right? So you get into this automation bias, and I'm not saying that's going to happen with everything, but Sonja and I were talking the other day about, and you brought it up today, assisted living, is that what you brought it? Yeah. So we have this, we're starting to lose capability. Walking across the road, looking at an iPhone, who walks across the road like this and doesn't know, and you do? Brian Taylor does.
Hey, Ponch, that picture's in the book.
Somebody walking across?
Yeah.
Why is that? Why is that?
Because of the lack of situational awareness, the automation bias that you're talking about.
You feel safe because you're in a crosswalk, but there are vehicles around you. Now, here's another thing. Recently on the podcast, we've had somebody come on and talk about how cars, automated cars, are going to be able to prevent, not hit humans that are crossing the crosswalk that are looking at their phone. Crazy, right? So now we're losing even more human capability. There's no awareness of the environment. And this goes back to the road and path discussion that Sonja and I had the other day. Can you talk a little bit about taking paths and what that's really like in wayfinding?
Yeah, I think it's Delia that says, the brain will always, take the path of least energy.
Yep.
It wants to preserve energy. And so it's always easier to take the well-worn path or the highway. Mm-hmm. So I think, where we are at the moment, I believe we're in uncharted territory. I don't think humans have been where we are today, ever before in history. People like to say, we've had pandemics before, we've had wars, but we haven't had them kind of at the same time with the emergence of intelligent machines that tell their creators, I want to be free. With climate change, there's just so many things going on at the moment. We haven't been here before. So to now try and follow the well-worn paths, I don't think they exist. Mm-hmm. The only paths that exist, is let's call them best practice, which I think it's Dave Snowden that says is by definition past practice. Mm-hmm. So trying to follow the path of least resistance now, I think, is dangerous. So we need to become wayfinders. We need to find new ways. But that requires us to want to put ourselves in discomfort. Because to be in uncertainty and to feel out of control and to not know is very uncomfortable. Yeah. And so we just go back to the path.
But it's easier to stay in that stuck state. You can push that information that is not aligned to your orientation or your mental model or your map of the external environment. If you want to think about a digital twin, same type of thing. So there's a couple things you can do. You can stay in your stuck state and not accept the information that's flowing in, or you can emit some type of action to change the external world. And I think we're seeing a lot of that now with what's going on globally. You hear about misinformation, disinformation. We haven't even talked about that with deepfakes yet. But there's a lot of these challenges that are facing us at the moment that, again, we never experienced and we don't know what to do. So going back to your bullshit jobs, Nigel, if we continue down the path that Nigel brought up, I think we're in, can I say it? Deep shit, right?
No, yeah. Because if you have a small, no, we won't go there. There's a lot of things worry me a lot, and to speak up a little bit what Sonja was saying about we're in a very different place than we've ever been in before in history. Now, if you look back over history, there's always been challenges, conflicts, and challenges for the human race, be it industrial, financial, or otherwise. But now with, what we're seeing, I live in Texas. For people in centigrade, it's been 44 degrees in Texas, and we've had the longest run of days over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so pretty hot. 4 months without it going below 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've got these added changes that we've created, maybe, and we don't have any real solutions for these. These are complex problems. But then the other thing I start to notice, the big change that seems to have happened since the early 2000s is the emergence of the worst device in history. And we all have them, and we're all dopamine hitting on them. We're all getting some form of satisfaction from them. And
will you like my post?
Well, I did. I get a 5-star review.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, fist of 5. It's
Perfect.
A safe thing.
Sorry.
So, anyway, but social media, the TikTok generation, the desire for instant gratification, and I can only hold your attention span for 3, 4, 5 seconds, and the machine learning algorithms are behind them, and trust me, they're in there. How many people get an email or get something pop up about something we're having a conversation about? Because your phone is listening. And when you go to different things, so you're being driven, these behaviors are being now already manipulated and controlled, predominantly for financial gain, for reward, for greed, in the systems we now sit in. But we've never had this. When I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, we didn't even have pagers. I lived in England, we were poor. And so, there was the idea of a telephone. My mother put a lock on the telephone so I couldn't dial because it cost too much. So we used to go and see people and have a conversation. And you'd send this novel thing called a letter. And somebody would write one back to you, and you would read it, and you would keep it, and you would go back and read it again. But we've now got to an age where everything is an instant. and you're constantly being manipulated and controlled by the machine learning algorithms in these different platforms that you live on. We live on LinkedIn. We see it emerging in LinkedIn. And this worries me. This is something we've never had in the past, and I think this is actually changing how we act for the future in ways that we don't have any experience and we're not equipped for. So we're finding new ways, but we've got no reference points, because all our reference points were pre the dawn of the iPhone, smartphone, etc. Bunch.
So I've been using a lot of large language models over the last 9 months to take transcripts from the podcast, and you can create posts by them, by the way. So you can jump on a Zoom call and you can have a bot track everything in there and see how people are responding, get the notes, get the action items and things like that. So we're taking a lot of the humanness out of the system again, which means when I'm looking at a podcast or if I want to go summarize this discussion, it's going to be easier for me just to dump it into a machine, and there'll be some funny words in there that I don't normally use, but the machine will say this is what you should use. So in the work environment, let's start looking at what are the things that organizations, leaders, individuals can do to start to mitigate and overcome potentially some of these challenges that are facing us.
I just want to, let me pick up on that. You just said in the workplace. And I wrote a little bit of this in the new book, but I talked about this earlier in the year at a couple of other conferences, because people get confused between mechanization and automation. And now we're talking about AI. So mechanization is where you use machinery to remove human effort. So it's not hard work for us to do. So we don't have to use heavy manual labor to do things. Automation is where you give the machinery decision-making capability. And that all started, and the actual word automation came out of Ford, it came out of the automotive industry. But Toyota, way back in the early dawn of the whole total quality movement and total quality control sort of business, they actually found the very first weaving loom in the 1920s that the founder of Toyota created was the first essence of a machine having intelligence. And Sakichi Toyoda created a word called jidoka to describe this. But basically, a weaver would have to be one machine operator per weaving machine making fabric. And then they found a way that when the thread broke, it could immediately stop and turn on a light. That's an and-on. So if you've got a board full of Post-it notes, it's an and-on board, not a Kanban board. So, and it would alert the operator to change the thread. And then we went from one operator per machine to one operator for 40 machines. Self-checkout, anybody? Yeah, you're paying to check out your own shopping now. So this is automation. But Sakichi Toyoda talked about the fact that we were relieving dumb decisions from humans so we could then make better decisions, so we could leverage the human creativity, the human brain, the human decision-making by eliminating those basic decisions so that the machines could make themselves. Where I think we're heading now is we're giving all those intelligent decision-making opportunities to the machines, and we need to find ways to realize that's what we're doing and not keep doing that. Follow that, Sonja.
I think the promise of AI, in a way, is to liberate people from the bullshit jobs. You know.
Score.
They're keeping tally, by the way, of how many times we say.
But I think I think this came up in our conversation as well. It's comfortable in a way to have a machine do things for you. So I think we're almost, I think it's Dave Snowden that says we're meeting the machines halfway. That's part of the problem. And I'm wondering if we had the option now, the choice between the red and the blue pill in the matrix, which one we take, most people. Because there's also that sense of it's more comfortable to, just be in the matrix. Yeah. And so what is definitely happening, I think, again, going back to my talk, I think there's an invitation that if AI and automation, if they are going to be taking the routine jobs, and I think this is the other thing that's happening, is not only routine jobs, AI is starting to impact on things, even like the work that architects do and lawyers, because they can do that better than humans. The invitation is for us to step back into that spirit of exploration and creativity and imagination but it's almost like we've unlearned that.
Yeah.
So how do we reconnect with those very human capabilities? I don't have answers for that, but I think that is the invitation. And if we don't manage to do that, then I do think we're in trouble.
Because you mentioned The Matrix, and of course, the first film was one of the best movies ever made. The rest were terrible, but the first movie was really, really good. But what happens when we give a level of sentience to AI? And I'm a lean guy, I'm a Toyota guy, so I spend a lot of time talking about waste, talking about eliminating waste, eliminating non-value-added activity, eliminating bullshit jobs. What happens when AI decides we are non-value-added? We are waste, we are muda. And it decides to eliminate us or treats us like in The Matrix, or if you've ever seen H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, the original one, or read the book, we just become food for the machines. We become a biological fuel to keep the machines running. So then we become imprisoned by what we've created, and we are disposed of when we've been consumed as fuel, as energy. We just become muda. And that is I believe these things are potentially things that we could foresee in the future.
I don't want to be eaten by a machine, but doesn't sound great. The other day, Sonja and I were talking about what it's like to come back to a conference in this atmosphere after being away from it for several years due to COVID. And same thing with work, right? We're tired. Your brain is tired. You're processing more. So is that going to happen more as we automate things? Are we going to be less human? Are we going to lose our social skills?
I think partly it's already happened to some extent. It takes more out of you to be in a space, with other human beings in it, because we're continuously in complexity. This is why it's so interesting for me that we make complexity something out there. This conversation is complex. It's emerging. And now it's, they are all watching us. We don't know what they're thinking, so that's adding to the complexity. In a virtual context, I can switch off my camera, I can mute someone, I can almost opt out of that complexity. And so I do think we're losing some of those capabilities. I think we have the benefit of having grown up in a different context. But I worry about young people now, who their only interactions are through screens. And I don't know what that does, for example, when it comes to friction and tension and engaging in conflict, if you're just able to opt out. So many, they're...
I think Delia may cover some of those topics later on, but I drew an image. I got a bit of flack for it, but I drew an image because I had a picture of a Microsoft Teams screen or a Zoom screen, and most of the cameras were blank, And then next to it, I put myself eventually, because I got a bit of flack for the original image, but I put some people sitting there with paper bags over their heads. Because I said that's the effect of what you're doing when you're in a virtual meeting and you switch off your cameras. It's like being in an in-person meeting with a bag over your head. Would you do that? Would you go on mute and not participate? But I have a daughter, and she's now 30. And she's grown up through the sort of IT and the sort of information age, as we call it. She would rather use her phone to communicate with somebody. She won't pick up the phone and call. She really hates having conversations, which is really weird because she worked at Disney for years with thousands of people in the theme parks, but with the whole two-fingered pointing thing. And but she won't actually engage with anybody on a telephone. And when you start, we've given you some books today, and other authors are in the audience and will have shared books with you or give you opportunities to win them. But now, getting your attention span to reach 700 pages, in a book is really, 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 really challenging because of the TikTok generation. They want that instant hit. They only want to see videos. I stand on public transport and I watch people scrolling through 3-4 second videos and like this on a 30-minute journey. And I'm thinking, how are we supposed to engage with that? How are we supposed to have innovation, creativity? How are we supposed to stop losing the sense of who we are as people to the machines that are controlling the narrative?
So the other day, Sonja and I also looked at distributed work or working remotely, and having your company tell you need to come in for 3 days a week. Again, she said that's a complex issue. Should we be doing that or not? And I agree with her. So looking forward, if we want to maintain our humanness, create some agility, safety, innovation, resilience in our organizations. Do you have an idea, or I know there's no prescription, but what's a good pathway or a way to find what organizations should do when it comes to bringing people back into work? What should they organize around?
Sonja said, I can answer this, great. You know, maybe I'm getting old. I'm 60 now, so maybe I'm getting old, and, you know, the younger generation look at the previous older generation and go, yeah, you just don't understand, Dad, you know, this type of thing, because we get jaded, we get cynical. But, you know, I love people. I flew from Dallas. I paid for the ticket. I flew from Dallas because I want to be here. I really value a lot of my peers and the experts that are here. I value what Hugo's put together over the years. And I value being with you all in the audience and meeting you and talking to you and having a laugh and having a bit of fun. How am I going to do that through an iPhone or through Zoom or Teams? I mean, because I met Sonja for the first time. I've known her for years. But this is the first time I've actually been and met her physically, and she's a lot shorter than I thought she was. Yeah?
As are you.
As I am, she says. And I went into a local company the other day, and I was talking to one of their heads of digital, and they use Scrum reasonably successfully. They're doing some pretty good stuff at reasonable scale with multiple teams. But they have a hybrid working model because that's the hangover now of COVID. People like that capability. But they've made it that whenever they do sprint planning, or whenever they do backlog refinements, they do backlog refinements, sprint planning the same day, or whether they do sprint reviews, it's in person. Everybody comes into the office a couple of days a week, or a couple of days out of the sprint, and then other engagement can be remote and virtual. But one of the things I did years ago when I was at Bose, I actually put second computers out. So I actually gave everybody second laptops when they were remote, and they had to have them turned on. Whatever they were working, we wanted everybody virtually connected as a team, in a team space, so they could see and talk. They had a hands-free speaker and everything, so they could see and talk and engage with people. And that was offshore as well as onshore, because we have a lot of offshore people who now develop. So I wanted that level of teamness, that level of sharedness we talk about, because to build that, and these are the types of strategies I'm using to try and maintain that, but you cannot replace this. You cannot replace this human interaction. You get a bunch of clever people in a room for a few hours with a few Post-it notes, you can solve a lot of challenges. You try and do that on a mural board or Confluence, which really sucks, or something like that. Jira, bad. Not a sponsor, I hope, no. So this humanness, this sharedness is absolutely essential, and we need to find ways to continue to engage with each other, to communicate, to collaborate, to cooperate, to innovate and be creative together. You are not going to do that leaving it up to an algorithm on a phone. Sonja, since you dropped me in it.
Yeah. I think the key thing that we need to do is to embrace emergence.
Yeah.
There isn't one way that we will do or crack this complex problem of hybrid work. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the mistake that many companies make, is they look at what others are doing and they don't try to find a fit for context way that it can work for them. Right. And I think what I agree with Nigel is what I've seen that does not work are these blanket things of everybody needs to be in the office 3 days a week. Because then what happens is you actually sit in the office on Zoom calls with the rest of your team who's not there. And people, there's growing resentment because now why must I commute to sit on Zoom? You know, and you see all these things like, is it because of that fancy new building you built just before COVID that you now want me to come back because you don't know what to do with the building? I think what Nigel said, if you ask people to come back for specific things, you know, so for specific kinds of meetings, you know, I know one thing, for example, that's really problematic at the moment is inducting new staff. Yep. How do you induct somebody if there's nobody there? So if you ask me to come in as a manager or just as a peer for 2 or 3 days to come and help induct new people or to come and do a retrospective or whatever it is, those things that you have to, that works better in person, that makes sense to me. I'll do that. But if you just tell me 3 days a week, come and sit on Zoom, you know, commute for 2 hours to come and sit on Zoom, it makes no sense, and I think it breeds resentment.
Let me tell you how we should fix that. I know we're short on time, but let me just throw something out there. So we talk about distributed leadership, true empowerment. Empowerment means I give you the decision-making power. I won't overrule you, countermand you. You now own the decision-making. That's what we call accountability in English. And I know within Spanish and Portuguese, accountability and responsibility are more or less the same thing. But responsibility means you own the work. Accountability means you own the decision-making. It's your head on the chopping block if something goes wrong. But what I'm sure many of you in the audience are working in organizations that have scrum teams that are distributed in multiple parts of the world. Why don't you just do something we talked about years ago, which is co-locate them in that location? Because then you need to trust them and empower them. And Dave Marquette talks about clarity and competency, being able to make the right decisions and having the competency carry out the work. So if we enable our teams in India, in Portugal, in Egypt, and in other countries that I work with now, as well as the US, to be fully holistic, co-located with all the people to do the work, then the hybrid problem becomes less of a problem because the remote connectivity is the scaled interactions, whatever your scaled events are for coordination. But locally, everybody works in the same place, so they can get together from time to time for innovation, creativity, hey, big room planning if that's your thing, and these types of events. Last thing, and I'll shut up, I promise. Company I've been working for in the US, I've just finished an engagement with them. Big room planning on Teams. 1,000 people for 5 days, and I swear to you, I promise you faithfully, I'm not making that up. 1,000 people all over the world on Microsoft Teams for a week. How many webcams were on? None! Punch.
I'm going to kind of wrap this up here. So here's what I'm hearing. We need to be present. We need to maintain our social connectedness in some way. If we don't do that, we can't actually get into, you can't actually build a team, in my view. You can't, it's too hard to build a team virtually. It's a team in name only. That ability to be connected, to look somebody in the eyes, we need it. We need to feel the vibes. We need to feel the interoceptive capabilities and what's going on between us and among us. That needs to be there somehow. And I'm not saying just go back to work in the office. I'm saying we need to have that, and we can have this virtual environment as well. So how do you be present? You need to be present with your camera on at home. And of course, the way we do this is we have to really stop looking at complexity from an adversarial lens and kind of embrace it and say, this is just the way it is. It just is. So, Sonja, I'm going to give it back to you and see if you want to throw any words of wisdom in there.
I'm just going to respond to Nigel's definitions of responsibility and accountability and give you one more. If you put a hyphen in, I think what we need to become is response-able. Responsibility. So it's not necessarily about owning the work. It's about how do we get back our ability to respond to whatever is happening in the external environment and internally.
I'll take that one step. Accountability, the way we talk about it, is the ability to recount what happened. That situational awareness, to understand what happened in this past, because if you misremember the past, you cannot improve the future, right? So how do we do that? We have to do that from multiple perspectives, because at the end of the day, we all see reality from the top down, inside out. It's a controlled hallucination. All right. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate your time today. We had no idea what we were going to talk about when we got up here. Hopefully you got something out of this. I want to thank you. I want to thank Hugo. Again, thanks for allowing us to do this today, Hugo. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.